The white silk caught the morning light as Maya Rodriguez held up what should have been her wedding dress. Instead, she was standing in the bedroom of her deceased sister's apartment, surrounded by boxes of designer clothes that would never be worn again. The irony wasn't lost on her that Sophia had spent her final years collecting beautiful things she rarely had the chance to enjoy, while Maya had saved every penny for one perfect dress that her sister had stolen right from under her. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The funeral was in 3 hours, and Maya had made a decision that would either honor her sister's memory or destroy what remained of their family's fragile peace. She was going to wear Sophia's unused wedding dress to lay her to rest, the same way Sophia had worn Maya's dress to marry the man who was supposed to be Maya's husband. The story began 18 months earlier in the quaint coastal town of Monterey Bay, where Maya had built a quiet but fulfilling life as a marine biologist at the local aquarium. At 32, she had finally found her rhythm after years of struggling to establish herself in a competitive field dominated by men who questioned her every observation and dismissed her research on dolphin communication patterns. Her small cottage near the harbor wasn't much to look at from the outside, but Maya had transformed it into a sanctuary filled with books, rescued plants, and the gentle sounds of wind chimes that reminded her of the ocean's rhythm. Maya's relationship with her younger sister Sophia had always been complicated, though she hadn't fully understood the depth of that complication until it was too late. Growing up in San Antonio, Texas, the Rodriguez sisters had been as different as the desert and the sea. Maya was studious, methodical, and deeply empathetic, spending her childhood rescuing injured birds and reading marine biology textbooks while other kids played video games. Sophia was magnetic, impulsive, and blessed with the kind of natural beauty that made strangers turn their heads on the street. Their parents, Roberto and Carmen Rodriguez, had immigrated from Guadalajara when Maya was 5 and Sophia was 3, working double shifts at a textile factory to build a better life for their daughters. Roberto's hands were permanently stained from fabric dyes, and Carmen's back ached from hunching over sewing machines. But they never complained. Instead, they poured all their hopes into their girls, believing that education and hard work would open doors that had been closed to them. Maya embraced this philosophy wholeheartedly, earning scholarships that took her from community college to UC Santa Barbara, where she discovered her passion for marine conservation. She lived on ramen noodles and library coffee, working part-time jobs to send money home while maintaining a perfect GPA. Every achievement felt like a tribute to her parents' sacrifices, and she wore her academic success like armor against the world's uncertainties. Sophia took a different path entirely. She was naturally brilliant, capable of understanding complex concepts with minimal effort, but she found traditional education suffocating. Instead, she channeled her intelligence into reading people, understanding their desires and motivations with an accuracy that was both gift and curse. By 17, she had discovered that her beauty and charm could open doors just as effectively as Maya's diplomas, though the doors they opened led to very different rooms. While Maya was completing her master's degree in marine biology, Sophia was moving to Los Angeles to pursue modeling and acting. She landed commercial work almost immediately, her camera-friendly features and natural charisma making her a favorite for lifestyle brands and romantic comedy background roles. The money wasn't consistent, but it was enough to maintain a Hollywood apartment and the lifestyle that came with it. For several years, the sisters maintained a loving but distant relationship. Maya would call every Sunday evening, listening to Sophia's stories about auditions and photo shoots while sharing her own quieter victories of published research papers and successful grant applications. They seemed to exist in parallel universes that occasionally intersected during holidays and family celebrations, where their differences became more apparent but still manageable. The shift began when Maya met David Chen at a marine conservation conference in Carmel. David was a documentary filmmaker specializing in ocean wildlife, with previous work that had aired on National Geographic and the Discovery Channel. He was intelligent without being condescending, passionate about his craft, and genuinely interested in Maya's research on dolphin social structures. Their first conversation lasted 4 hours, wandering through topics from climate change to childhood dreams, and Maya felt something she had rarely experienced, the sensation of being truly seen and understood by another person. David was also devastatingly handsome in an understated way, with kind eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses and hands that moved expressively when he talked about his latest project. He was the type of man who remembered small details about conversations and sent thoughtful text messages that made Maya smile during her lunch breaks at the aquarium. When he asked her to dinner 3 days after they met, Maya felt nervous in a way she hadn't since high school. Their relationship developed with the careful patience of two people who had been hurt before and valued authentic connection over romantic drama. David appreciated Maya's quiet intelligence and dedication to her work, while Maya was drawn to his creative vision and the way he could find beauty in the most ordinary moments. He would arrive at the aquarium with coffee and croissants, content to sit quietly while she completed her observations, occasionally asking questions that showed he was genuinely listening to her explanations of dolphin behavior patterns. 6 months into their relationship, David proposed during a sunset walk along Lover's Point. The proposal was perfectly suited to Maya's personality, intimate and thoughtful rather than elaborate or public. He had researched the history of the area, knowing that Maya loved learning about the geological formations and marine ecosystems that made Monterey Bay unique. As they watched harbor seals playing in the waves below, David told her that being with her felt like coming home to a place he hadn't known he was searching for. The engagement ring was modest, but meaningful, a vintage piece from the 1940s with a single solitaire diamond that caught the fading light like captured sunlight. Maya had never cared about expensive jewelry, but the ring represented something precious, the promise of building a life with someone who valued her mind as much as her heart. She called her parents immediately, their joy evident even through the scratchy phone connection. And then she called Sophia. Sophia's reaction was enthusiastic and supportive, at least on the surface. She screamed with excitement, demanded details about the proposal, and immediately began planning her role as maid of honor.
Maya felt grateful for her sister's enthusiasm, especially since she had always been self-conscious about her romantic life around Sophia, who seemed to attract admirers effortlessly. Having Sophia's approval of David felt like receiving a blessing from someone who understood love and attraction better than Maya ever would. The wedding planning began slowly, with Maya preferring simplicity over spectacle. She wanted a small ceremony at the Monterey Bay Aquarium, surrounded by the exhibits that had shaped her career and the people who mattered most to her. David was equally content with an intimate celebration, more interested in the marriage than the wedding itself. They set the date for October, when the weather would be mild and the tourist crowds would have thinned. Maya's approach to wedding dress shopping reflected her practical nature and limited budget. She spent weeks researching designers and styles online, reading reviews and comparing prices with the methodical precision she applied to her scientific work. When she finally made appointments at bridal salons, she had a clear vision of what she wanted. Something elegant but understated, suitable for a ceremony in an unconventional venue, and within the budget she had carefully saved over 2 years. The dress she ultimately chose was from a small boutique in Carmel, created by a local designer who specialized in vintage-inspired gowns. The silhouette was reminiscent of 1930s Hollywood glamour, with a biased cut skirt that flowed like water and delicate beadwork that caught the light without overwhelming the clean lines of the design. The fabric was silk crepe in the softest ivory, and when Maya tried it on for the final fitting, she felt transformed in a way that was both surprising and deeply satisfying. The price was significant for Maya, representing months of careful budgeting and sacrificed luxuries, but she considered it an investment in the most important day of her life. The boutique owner, an elderly woman named Eleanor, who had been designing wedding dresses for 40 years, understood the magnitude of the purchase and treated Maya with the reverence usually reserved for brides with unlimited budgets. Maya arranged to pick up the dress 2 weeks before the wedding, giving herself plenty of time for any final adjustments and the peace of mind that came with having such an important detail completed early. She had learned from her mother's stories about wedding preparations gone wrong, where last-minute crises created unnecessary stress during what should be a joyful time. Sophia arrived in Monterey Bay a week before the wedding, ostensibly to help with final preparations and spend quality time with her sister before the big day. Maya was thrilled to have the support, especially since her own social circle in the area was relatively small and focused primarily on work colleagues. Sophia's presence brought an energy and excitement that Maya appreciated, even if she sometimes felt overshadowed by her sister's natural magnetism. The sisters spent the week addressing wedding invitations, arranging flowers, and handling the countless small tasks that accumulate in the final days before a ceremony. Sophia seemed genuinely invested in making Maya's wedding perfect, offering suggestions with the confidence of someone who had attended dozens of elegant events in Los Angeles. She helped Maya practice her makeup, experimented with different hairstyles, and even accompanied her to pick up the wedding dress from Eleanor's boutique. When Maya emerged from the fitting room wearing her dress for Sophia to see, her sister's reaction was everything Maya could have hoped for. Sophia actually gasped, covering her mouth with her hands before tears began forming in her eyes. She told Maya she looked absolutely radiant, like a fairy tale princess, but better, because she was real and intelligent and deserving of every happiness the world could offer. Maya felt beautiful for perhaps the first time in her life, not just physically, but completely, as if all the parts of herself that she had always considered awkward or insufficient had finally aligned into something worthy of celebration. Sophia took photos with her phone, insisting that Maya would want to remember this moment when she was old and gray, and Maya trusted her sister enough to let her guard down completely. The dress was carefully wrapped and placed in Maya's bedroom closet, where it would remain untouched until the morning of the ceremony. Maya had already arranged her schedule to take the day before the wedding completely off, planning to spend it in quiet preparation, maybe taking a solitary walk along the beach to center herself before stepping into her new life as David's wife. But when Maya woke up on Friday morning, the day before her wedding, something felt wrong immediately. The cottage was too quiet, missing the sounds of Sophia moving around in the guest bedroom or making coffee in the kitchen. Maya called her sister's name softly, then louder, but received no response. Sophia's rental car was gone from the driveway and her luggage had disappeared from the guest room. Maya's first instinct was concern rather than suspicion. Perhaps Sophia had gone out early to pick up last-minute supplies or handle some emergency that had arisen overnight. But as the morning stretched into afternoon with no word from her sister, Maya began to feel a creeping anxiety that had nothing to do with normal pre-wedding nerves. She tried calling Sophia's phone repeatedly, but each call went straight to voicemail. The messages Maya left progressed from casual inquiry to genuine worry to barely controlled panic. By 3 o'clock in the afternoon, with still no word from Sophia, Maya decided to check on the wedding dress to reassure herself that everything was still in place for the next day's ceremony. The closet door was open, which should have been the first warning sign because Maya was meticulous about keeping things closed and organized. But it wasn't until she pushed aside her everyday clothes and reached for the garment bag that the full scope of the betrayal became clear. The bag was gone, along with the dress, the matching shoes Maya had dyed to complement the beadwork, and even the vintage pearl necklace that had belonged to our grandmother. Maya stood in her empty closet for several minutes, trying to process what she was seeing and what it meant. Her first thought was that perhaps Sophia had taken the dress somewhere for steaming or some kind of preparation Maya wasn't aware of. But even as she grasped for innocent explanations, a terrible certainty was forming in her chest like ice crystallizing around her heart. She called David immediately, her voice shaking as she explained what she had discovered. David's response was immediate and protective, insisting that there had to be a reasonable explanation and that they would figure everything out together. He drove to Maya's cottage within minutes, bringing with him a calm presence that helped Maya think more clearly about their options.
They spent the next hour calling local bridal shops, dry cleaners, and even the police, though the officer who took Maya's report was skeptical that a crime had actually been committed. Without clear evidence of theft, and given that the missing person was Maya's own sister, who had been staying in her home, the situation fell into a gray area that law enforcement was reluctant to pursue aggressively. As evening approached, Maya finally received a text message from Sophia's phone. The message was brief and shocking in its casual cruelty. The text simply read, "Sorry, but I needed it more than you do. You'll understand someday." Attached was a photo that made Maya's blood run cold. Sophia wearing Maya's wedding dress while standing next to David in what appeared to be a courthouse or municipal building. The betrayal was complete and devastating in a way that Maya struggled to comprehend. Not only had Sophia stolen her dress, but she had somehow convinced David to abandon their wedding and marry her instead. The man Maya had trusted with her heart, the one person outside her family who she had believed truly understood and valued her, had been seduced away by her sister's magnetic charm. Maya's world collapsed around her with the swift brutality of a natural disaster. The wedding, scheduled for the next day, became a humiliating cancellation that required dozens of phone calls to vendors, guests, and family members who couldn't understand how such a thing was possible. Maya's parents drove from San Antonio immediately, their own shock and disappointment compounding Maya's grief in ways that made the betrayal feel even more isolating. The months that followed were among the darkest of Maya's life. She threw herself into her work with an intensity that worried her colleagues, spending 12-hour days at the aquarium and accepting every research assignment that would take her away from Monterey Bay and the memories that haunted every familiar location. She moved to a smaller apartment closer to the water, selling most of her furniture and belongings in an attempt to create a completely fresh environment. David and Sophia settled in Los Angeles, where Sophia's entertainment industry connections helped David secure funding for increasingly ambitious documentary projects. They appeared together at industry events and charity galas, looking perfectly matched in a way that Maya had to admit was undeniable. Sophia's social media accounts were filled with photos of their glamorous life, designer clothes, exotic vacations, and the kind of effortless happiness that Maya had once believed she might share with David. The pain of the betrayal was complicated by Maya's inability to completely hate either David or Sophia, despite what they had done to her. She understood, intellectually, that David had been overwhelmed by Sophia's combination of beauty, charm, and sophisticated worldliness. Maya had always known that her sister possessed a kind of magnetic appeal that she herself lacked, and she couldn't entirely blame David for being susceptible to it. Similarly, her feelings about Sophia were tangled with a lifetime of complicated sisterly dynamics that made pure anger difficult to sustain. Maya recognized that Sophia had always been insecure beneath her confident exterior, constantly seeking validation and attention in ways that sometimes led to destructive choices. The wedding dress theft was perhaps the most dramatic example of this pattern, but it wasn't entirely out of character for someone who had always struggled to believe that she deserved good things without taking them from others. Maya's healing process was slow and nonlinear, involving therapy sessions where she gradually untangled her own role in enabling the family dynamics that had made such a betrayal possible. She learned to recognize her own pattern of making herself smaller to accommodate Sophia's needs, and she began to understand that her sister's betrayal was as much about Sophia's own insecurities as it was about Maya's perceived inadequacies. Gradually, Maya rebuilt her life around her work and a small circle of genuine friends who valued her for her intelligence, kindness, and dry sense of humor. She advanced in her career, eventually becoming the lead researcher on a groundbreaking study of marine mammal intelligence that brought her recognition in scientific journals and conservation circles. Her personal life remained cautiously guarded, but she began dating occasionally, though she was careful to avoid anyone who reminded her too much of David or seemed susceptible to the kind of charm that Sophia wielded so effectively. The sisters maintained minimal contact over the following year, limited to brief exchanges during family holidays and birthdays. Maya's parents were heartbroken by the rift between their daughters, but seemed unable to address the magnitude of what Sophia had done or expect any meaningful accountability from her. They treated the situation like an unfortunate misunderstanding rather than a deliberate betrayal, which left Maya feeling even more isolated in her pain. Sophia's marriage to David appeared successful from the outside, judging by the carefully curated glimpses Maya occasionally saw through mutual acquaintances or social media posts she couldn't entirely avoid. They traveled frequently for David's work, attending film festivals and charity galas, where Sophia played the role of supportive wife with apparent skill and enthusiasm.
Maya wondered sometimes if Sophia was truly happy or simply performing happiness with the same skill she had once used to book modeling jobs. The phone call that changed everything came on a Tuesday morning in March, almost exactly 18 months after the wedding that never happened. Maya was reviewing data from her latest research project when her father called, his voice heavy with shock and grief. Sophia had been killed in a car accident in Malibu, driving home from a charity event in the early hours of the morning. The other driver had been under the influence and had run a red light, striking Sophia's car at an intersection she had driven through hundreds of times before. Maya's reaction to the news surprised her with its complexity. Grief mixed with anger, relief tangled with guilt, and underneath it all, a profound sadness for all the conversations they would never have and all the healing that would now remain forever incomplete. Despite everything that had happened between them, Sophia was still her sister, still the little girl who had once followed Maya around their childhood home and begged to be included in her games. The funeral arrangements fell largely to Maya, since David seemed overwhelmed by his grief and their parents were too devastated to handle the logistics. Maya found herself making decisions about flowers, music, and readings while struggling to process her own complicated feelings about Sophia's death. She wanted the service to honor the best parts of her sister while somehow acknowledging the complexity of the person they were saying goodbye to. The entries revealed that Sophia's marriage to David had been troubled almost from the beginning, built on a foundation of deception and mutual disillusionment that no amount of external success could repair. David had never fully forgiven himself for abandoning Maya, and Sophia had never been able to escape the knowledge that she had won her husband through manipulation rather than genuine love. They had created a beautiful prison for themselves, trapped by the very success that was supposed to validate Sophia's choices. In the back of Sophia's closet, carefully preserved in tissue paper and plastic garment bags, Maya discovered something that stopped her breath entirely. Her wedding dress hung there like a ghost of the life she might have lived, apparently never worn again after that devastating courthouse ceremony. Beside it was another dress, still bearing tags from an exclusive Beverly Hills boutique that Sophia had apparently purchased for a wedding that would now never take place. According to David, who seemed relieved to finally have someone to talk to about his complicated grief, Sophia had been planning to renew their wedding vows in a more elaborate ceremony. She had been working with a wedding planner for months, apparently trying to create the kind of celebration she had denied Maya and perhaps seeking some kind of redemption for the way their marriage had begun. The dress was a stunning creation of French lace and silk, more elaborate and expensive than anything Maya could have imagined wearing, but beautiful in its own dramatic way. As Maya held both dresses, the one that had been stolen from her and the one that would never be worn by Sophia, she felt something shifting inside her chest. An idea began forming that was either profound or completely insane, and Maya couldn't immediately tell which it was. The funeral was scheduled for the following day, and Maya had been planning to wear a simple black suit that seemed appropriate for the occasion. But looking at Sophia's unused wedding dress, Maya began to consider a different choice entirely. What if she wore Sophia's dress to the funeral, as a way of honoring the sister who had taken hers but had never really been able to enjoy the victory? What if she could somehow transform an act of theft into an act of grace, wearing the dress that represented Sophia's unrealized hopes for redemption? The idea was complicated by Maya's awareness that such a choice would be interpreted in many different ways by the people attending the funeral. Some would see it as a beautiful gesture of forgiveness and sisterly love. Others would view it as inappropriate or attention-seeking, a way of making Sophia's funeral about Maya's own unresolved feelings. David might be hurt or confused by the symbolism, and Maya's parents might not understand the gesture at all. But as Maya continued to examine both dresses, she realized that her decision wasn't really about how others would interpret her choice. It was about finding a way to honor both the sister she had loved and the sister who had betrayed her, acknowledging that Sophia had both victim and perpetrator in the complicated dynamics that had shaped their relationship. The white silk of Sophia's dress caught the morning light streaming through the apartment windows, and Maya made her decision with the same careful consideration she applied to all her important choices.
She would wear Sophia's wedding dress to lay her sister to rest, not as an act of revenge or reclamation, but as a final gift to someone whose life had been cut short before she could fully understand the consequences of her choices or find her way back to the person she might have been. Maya spent the rest of that day preparing for a funeral that would be unlike anything she had ever imagined, holding both grief and grace in her heart as she prepared to say goodbye to her sister in the most complicated and meaningful way she could imagine. The morning of Sophia's funeral arrived with the kind of crystalline clarity that seemed inappropriate for such a somber occasion. Maya stood before the full-length mirror in her hotel room, wearing her sister's wedding dress, and felt as though she was looking at a stranger. The French lace hugged her frame differently than it would have hugged Sophia's, but the effect was undeniably striking. The dress transformed Maya in ways she hadn't anticipated, lending her an ethereal quality that seemed to bridge the gap between mourning and celebration. The decision to wear the dress had seemed clear the night before, but in the harsh morning light, Maya felt the weight of what she was about to do. She would be walking into a church filled with people who knew the history between her and Sophia, wearing a dress that represented everything complicated about their relationship. Some would understand the gesture as forgiveness, others would see it as revenge, and most would simply be confused by the symbolism. Maya had spent considerable time on the phone with her parents the previous evening, trying to explain her choice without revealing the full extent of what she had discovered in Sophia's journals. Roberto and Carmen were still processing their own grief, struggling to understand how their family had fractured so completely and whether they bore any responsibility for the dynamics that had driven their daughters apart. Maya's decision to wear Sophia's dress added another layer of complexity to their mourning, though they eventually agreed to support whatever choice would help Maya find peace. David's reaction had been more difficult to predict. When Maya called to inform him of her decision, he had been quiet for a long time, before asking if she was certain this was what she wanted to do. His voice carried a weight of guilt and regret that made Maya wonder if he had read Sophia's journals as well, or if he had simply lived with the knowledge of his own choices for long enough to understand their true cost. The conversation with David had revealed aspects of his marriage to Sophia that Maya hadn't fully grasped from the journal entries alone. He described feeling trapped in a relationship built on deception, loving someone who had never been able to forgive herself for how they had come together. Sophia's beauty and charm had attracted him initially, but the guilt over abandoning Maya had poisoned every moment of happiness they might have shared. According to David, Sophia had spent the last months of her life trying to find ways to make amends, though she had never been able to bring herself directly out to Maya directly. The elaborate vow renewal she had been planning was partly an attempt to create the kind of wedding celebration she had denied both herself and Maya, and partly a desperate effort to build something genuine on the foundation of their problematic beginning. Maya felt a complicated mixture of sympathy and frustration as she listened to David describe his late wife's struggles with guilt and self-doubt. Part of her wanted to feel vindicated by the knowledge that Sophia's victory had been hollow, but a larger part simply felt sad for the years of potential happiness that all three of them had lost to pride, insecurity, and poor choices. The hotel room where Maya was staying overlooked the Pacific Ocean, and as she made final adjustments to the dress, she could see early morning joggers making their way along the beach path. The normalcy of their routine felt surreal against the backdrop of her own extraordinary circumstances. In a few hours, she would be standing in front of hundreds of people wearing a dress that told a story most of them would never fully understand. Maya's phone buzzed with a text message from her college roommate, Elena, who was flying in from Seattle to attend the funeral.
Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story.
Elena was one of the few people who knew the complete history of Maya's relationship with Sophia, and she had been both supportive and concerned when Maya explained her plan to wear the wedding dress. The message was characteristically direct, asking if Maya needed anything and reminding her that she didn't owe anyone an explanation for her choices. The friendship with Elena had been one of the most valuable relationships Maya had maintained through all the upheaval of the past 18 months. Elena worked as a pediatric nurse and possessed the kind of practical wisdom that came from dealing with life-and-death situations on a daily basis. She had been the one to suggest therapy after Maya's wedding was canceled, and she had provided a steady source of support throughout Maya's healing process. Elena's arrival at the hotel provided Maya with the grounding presence she needed as the morning progressed toward the funeral service. Elena took one look at Maya in the wedding dress and nodded approvingly, understanding immediately what Maya was trying to accomplish. She helped with final adjustments to the dress and spent time simply sitting with Maya, providing the kind of comfortable silence that only comes from deep friendship. The drive to the church took them through neighborhoods where Sophia had lived during her years in Los Angeles, past the boutiques where she had shopped and the restaurants where she had dined with David and their circle of entertainment industry friends. Maya found herself noticing details she had missed during previous visits, seeing the city through the lens of her sister's experience and trying to understand what had drawn Sophia to this particular version of success. The church itself was a beautiful Spanish colonial structure in Beverly Hills, chosen by David for its architectural elegance and its capacity to accommodate the large crowd expected for Sophia's funeral. Maya had never been particularly religious, but she appreciated the solemn beauty of the sanctuary and the way the morning light filtered through stained glass windows to create patterns of color on the stone floors. As they arrived at the church, Maya could see that the parking lot was already filling with the kind of expensive cars that suggested Sophia's Los Angeles social circle would be well represented at the service. There were also more modest vehicles that Maya recognized as belonging to family members and old friends from Texas, creating an interesting mixture of mourners who represented different aspects of Sophia's life. Elena stayed close to Maya as they made their way toward the church entrance, providing both physical and emotional support as Maya prepared to face the reactions of people who would undoubtedly be surprised by her choice of attire. The white dress drew immediate attention from other mourners, though most were too polite to comment directly on what they were seeing. Maya's parents were waiting near the entrance, dressed in their most formal attire and looking smaller somehow than Maya remembered. The past week had aged them both, and Maya felt a pang of guilt for adding to their stress with her unconventional choice. But when Carmen saw her daughter in Sophia's dress, her expression softened with something that looked like understanding, as if she finally grasped what Maya was trying to communicate. Roberto's reaction was more complicated, his face cycling through confusion, concern, and eventual acceptance as he processed what he was seeing. He had always been the more emotionally reserved of Maya's parents, but he approached his daughter and took her hands gently, his eyes reflecting a mixture of pride and sorrow that made Maya's chest tighten with emotion. The family spent a few minutes together in a small anteroom adjacent to the main sanctuary, sharing the kind of quiet conversation that occurs before significant ceremonies. Maya's parents asked gentle questions about her decision to wear the dress, and Maya tried to explain her feelings about forgiveness, remembrance, and the complex nature of sisterly love. She wasn't entirely sure they understood, but their willingness to support her choice felt like a gift she hadn't expected. David appeared in the doorway of the anteroom, looking haggard and older than his 35 years. He was dressed in a perfectly tailored black suit that emphasized his lean frame, but his usually confident demeanor had been replaced by something more fragile and uncertain. When he saw Maya and Sophia's dress, his expression crumpled momentarily before he regained control of his emotions. The conversation between Maya and David was awkward but necessary, filled with apologies and explanations that felt both too late and exactly on time. David thanked Maya for her generosity in helping with funeral arrangements and for her decision to honor Sophia's memory in such a meaningful way. He also offered his own apology for the choices he had made 18 months earlier, though both of them understood that some wounds couldn't be fully healed through words alone. As the funeral service began, Maya took her place in the front row alongside her parents, acutely aware of the whispered conversations happening behind her as other mourners noticed her unusual attire. The white dress stood out dramatically against the sea of black clothing worn by other attendees, creating a visual statement that was impossible to ignore. The service itself was a careful balance between honoring Sophia's life and acknowledging the complexity of her personality and choices. The pastor, who had met with the family several times during the week, spoke about forgiveness, redemption, and the mysterious ways that love can persist even in the face of deep hurt and disappointment. His words seemed directed as much toward the loving as toward the memory of the deceased. Several of Sophia's friends from Los Angeles spoke during the service, sharing memories of her generosity, her infectious laughter, and her ability to make ordinary moments feel special through sheer force of personality. Maya listened to these remembrances and felt grateful that her sister had been loved and appreciated, even as she struggled with her own more complicated feelings about Sophia's character and choices. When Maya rose to deliver her own eulogy, the sanctuary felt completely silent.
Standing at the podium in Sophia's wedding dress felt surreal, like performing in a play she hadn't fully rehearsed. But as she looked out at the faces of people who had known and loved her sister, Maya felt a clarity about what she wanted to say. Maya's eulogy was honest without being harsh, acknowledging Sophia's beauty and charisma while also recognizing the insecurities and fears that had sometimes led her to make destructive choices. She spoke about the sister who had once built elaborate fairy houses in their childhood backyard, and the woman who had struggled to believe she deserved happiness without taking it from others. Most importantly, Maya used her time at the podium to talk about forgiveness, not as something that erased the past or excused harmful behavior, but as a choice to refuse to let old wounds define the future. She explained that wearing Sophia's dress was her way of saying that love could coexist with disappointment, and that sisters could honor each other even when they had also hurt each other. The response to Maya's eulogy was immediate and emotional. Several people in the congregation were openly weeping, and Maya could see her parents exchange looks of pride and relief. Even David seemed moved by her words, nodding slowly as she returned to her seat. After the service, as mourners gathered in the church hall for the reception, Maya found herself surrounded by people who wanted to express their admiration for her eulogy and her choice to wear Sophia's dress.
Many of Sophia's Los Angeles friends approached Maya with stories about how Sophia had talked about her brilliant scientist sister, revealing that Maya had been more present in Sophia's thoughts than she had realized. One conversation particularly struck Maya. A woman named Patricia, who had worked with Sophia on several commercial shoots, pulled Maya aside to share something Sophia had told her just weeks before the accident. According to Patricia, Sophia had been planning to reach out to Maya to try to make amends, but she had been terrified of rejection and uncertain about how to begin such a difficult conversation. Learning about Sophia's intentions didn't change what had happened between them, but it added another layer of complexity to Maya's understanding of her sister's final months. It seemed that Sophia had been trapped not just in an unsatisfying marriage, but in her own inability to find a way back to the relationships she had damaged through her choices. Elena stayed close to Maya throughout the reception, helping to navigate conversations with people who knew various versions of the family's story. Some had heard about the wedding dress incident from Sophia or David, while others were learning about it for the first time through context clues and whispered explanations from other guests. Maya found herself feeling oddly peaceful as the afternoon progressed. The decision to wear Sophia's dress had felt risky and potentially self-destructive, but the actual experience was proving to be cathartic in ways she hadn't anticipated. Standing in a room full of people who had loved her sister, wearing a dress that represented both theft and redemption, Maya felt something releasing inside her chest that she hadn't even realized she had been holding. David approached Maya near the end of the reception, when most of the other mourners had already departed. He looked exhausted but somehow lighter, as if the funeral had allowed him to set down a burden he had been carrying for too long. He asked Maya if they could talk privately, and she agreed, curious about what he might want to say. They found a quiet corner of the church hall, away from the remaining family members and friends who were helping to clean up. David's words came slowly at first, then in a rush of confession and explanation that revealed just how much guilt he had been carrying about his choices. He described the immediate regret he had felt after marrying Sophia, the growing realization that he had been manipulated, and his understanding that he had lost something irreplaceable when he abandoned his relationship with Maya. David also shared details about Sophia's struggles that Maya hadn't learned from the journals. According to him, Sophia had suffered from severe anxiety and depression in the months before her death, brought on partly by her inability to escape the consequences of her own actions. She had been seeing a therapist and taking medication, but she had never been able to fully forgive herself or find a way to repair the relationship she had damaged. Maya listened to David's revelations with a mixture of sadness and vindication. Part of her felt satisfied to know that the victory Sophia had claimed had been hollow, but a larger part simply felt grieved for all the suffering that could have been avoided if any of them had been braver or wiser in their choices. When David asked if Maya could ever forgive him, she considered the question carefully before answering. Forgiveness, she realized, wasn't really about David or Sophia anymore. It was about her own ability to move forward without carrying the weight of their betrayal into every future relationship and opportunity. Maya told David that she forgave him, not because what he had done was acceptable, but because holding on to anger was preventing her from building the life she actually wanted.
She also made it clear that forgiveness didn't mean forgetting or pretending that their actions hadn't had consequences. It simply meant that she was choosing to define herself by her own choices moving forward rather than by their choices in the past. As the day came to an end, Maya found herself back in her hotel room, carefully removing Sophia's wedding dress and hanging it in the closet. The symbolic weight of wearing the dress had accomplished what she had hoped it would, allowing her to honor her sister's memory while also reclaiming some sense of agency in her own story. Elena helped Maya pack her belongings and prepare for the flight back to Monterey Bay the next morning. They spent the evening walking along the beach, processing the events of the day and discussing Maya's plans for moving forward. Elena had always been skilled at asking the right questions to help Maya think through her own feelings, and she sensed that the funeral had been a turning point in Maya's healing process. Maya realized that wearing Sophia's dress had been less about making a statement to others and more about making peace with the parts of herself that had felt diminished by her sister's betrayal. The act of choosing grace over revenge, understanding over anger, had been empowering in ways that she was still discovering. The flight home gave Maya time to reflect on how much had changed since she first learned about Sophia's death. The grief was still present, but it was no longer tangled up with resentment and self-doubt. Instead, she felt a clarity about her own values and priorities that had been missing since her original wedding plans were destroyed. Back in Monterey Bay, Maya returned to her work at the aquarium with renewed energy and focus. Her colleagues noticed the change in her demeanor, commenting that she seemed more confident and settled in her own skin. Maya found herself taking on new challenges at work, proposing research projects that she might have considered too ambitious before. The experience of delivering Sophia's eulogy had also revealed Maya's gift for public speaking, something she had never considered developing. Within weeks of returning home, she was invited to present her research at a marine conservation conference, and she accepted with enthusiasm rather than the anxiety she might have felt in the past. Maya's personal life also began to shift in subtle but significant ways. She started accepting social invitations she might have previously declined, joining a book club and volunteering for a local environmental organization. The isolation she had imposed on herself after the betrayal began to lift, replaced by a genuine desire to connect with people who shared her interests and values. One of the most unexpected changes was Maya's relationship with her parents. The funeral had somehow broken down barriers that had existed between them for years, allowing for more honest conversations about family dynamics and expectations. Roberto and Carmen began to acknowledge their own role in creating the competitive dynamic between their daughters, and they made efforts to show Maya that her achievements were valued and celebrated. The phone calls with her parents became more frequent and substantial, moving beyond surface-level updates to include real conversations about Maya's work, her goals, and her feelings about the future. Carmen even began learning about marine biology so she could better understand her daughter's passion, asking thoughtful questions about Maya's research that showed genuine interest and pride. Maya also found herself thinking differently about romantic relationships. The betrayal by David had left her wary of trusting her own judgment about potential partners, but the healing process had helped her understand that David's choices said more about his character than about her worth as a partner. She began to consider the possibility of dating again, though she approached it with the same careful methodology she applied to her scientific work. Several months after Sophia's funeral, Maya received an unexpected package in the mail. It was from David, who was preparing to move away from Los Angeles and leave behind the life he had built with Sophia. Inside the package was Maya's original wedding dress, carefully preserved and accompanied by a note explaining that he had found it among Sophia's belongings and believed it should be returned to its rightful owner. Seeing the dress again brought back a flood of memories, but they no longer carried the same emotional charge they once had. Maya examined the beadwork and silk fabric that had once seemed so important, recognizing the beauty of the dress while also understanding that its significance had been transformed by everything that had happened since. After considerable thought, Maya decided to donate the dress to a nonprofit organization that provided wedding dresses to brides who couldn't afford them. The gesture felt appropriate, allowing the dress to fulfill its original purpose of bringing joy to someone on their wedding day, even if that someone wasn't Maya herself. The act of donating the dress marked another milestone in Maya's healing process.
She was no longer holding on to symbols of the life she had lost, but instead creating space for the life she was actively building. The future felt open and full of possibilities in ways it hadn't since before her engagement to David. Maya's work at the aquarium continued to flourish, and she began to gain recognition in marine biology circles for her innovative research methods and compelling presentations. The confidence she had discovered in herself during Sophia's funeral translated into professional success that felt earned and sustainable rather than dependent on external validation. As the anniversary of Sophia's death approached, Maya felt a complex mixture of emotions, but no longer the sharp pain that had once accompanied thoughts of her sister. She had learned to hold both love and disappointment, forgiveness and boundaries in the same space without needing to resolve the contradictions between them. Maya planned to spend the anniversary visiting some of Sophia's favorite places in Los Angeles, not out of obligation, but out of a genuine desire to honor the good memories they had shared alongside the difficult ones. The trip would be another step in the ongoing process of integrating the experience of loss and betrayal into a life story that was ultimately about resilience, growth, and the complicated nature of human relationships. The woman who had once stood in an empty closet, devastated by her sister's betrayal, had become someone who could wear that sister's wedding dress to her funeral as an act of grace. The transformation hadn't been easy or quick, but it had been profound and lasting, touching every aspect of Maya's life and relationships. Maya understood now that healing wasn't about forgetting or excusing what had happened, but about choosing how to carry those experiences forward in ways that served her own growth and happiness. Sophia's choices had caused real harm, but they had also inadvertently created opportunities for Maya to discover strengths and capabilities she might never have developed otherwise. The story wasn't over, Maya realized. It was simply moving into a new chapter, one where she was the primary author of her own experiences, rather than a victim of someone else's choices. The wedding dress she had worn to Sophia's funeral would remain a powerful symbol of that transformation, a reminder that even the most painful experiences could be transformed into sources of wisdom and strength. 2 years after Sophia's funeral, Maya stood in the observation deck of the newly opened Marine Mammal Research Center, watching a group of elementary school children press their faces against the glass as dolphins performed synchronized swimming patterns in the lagoon below. The facility represented the culmination of her professional dreams, a state-of-the-art research center that combined serious scientific work with public education about marine conservation. Maya had been appointed as the center's director of behavioral research, a position that allowed her to design groundbreaking studies while also sharing her passion for marine life with visitors from around the world. The job had required her to relocate from Monterey Bay to San Diego, but the move had felt like a natural progression rather than a difficult transition. The success of her dolphin communication research had opened doors she never could have imagined when she was working as a junior researcher at the aquarium. Her findings about the complexity of dolphin social structures had been published in Nature, leading to speaking engagements at conferences across the globe and consulting opportunities with marine parks and conservation organizations. More importantly, the work felt meaningful in ways that went beyond professional recognition. Every day brought new discoveries about the intelligence and emotional capacity of the animals she studied, reinforcing Maya's belief that her career was contributing to something larger than herself. The sense of purpose that had sustained her through the darkest period of her life had evolved into a genuine passion that made even the most challenging days feel worthwhile. The research center had become Maya's second home, a place where she could lose herself in observation and analysis while surrounded by colleagues who shared her dedication to understanding the natural world. The team she had assembled was diverse and talented, including researchers from universities around the world who had been drawn to San Diego by the opportunity to work with cutting-edge technology and unprecedented access to marine mammals. Maya's leadership style had developed organically, combining the methodical approach she had learned through years of scientific training with the emotional intelligence she had gained through her personal struggles. She was known for being demanding but fair, expecting excellence while also providing the support and resources necessary for her team to succeed. The healing process that had begun with Sophia's funeral had continued in ways Maya was still discovering. The decision to choose grace over revenge had fundamentally shifted how she approached challenges, both professional and personal. Instead of viewing setbacks as evidence of her own inadequacy, she had learned to see them as opportunities for growth and problem-solving. Maya's relationship with her parents had deepened significantly since their conversation at the funeral. Roberto and Carmen had made several visits to San Diego, marveling at their daughter's professional success while also taking obvious pride in the person she had become. The competitive dynamics that had once defined their family had given way to genuine appreciation for each daughter's unique qualities and contributions.
Carmen had started a small scholarship fund in Sophia's memory, providing financial assistance to young women pursuing careers in the arts. The gesture was both a tribute to Sophia's dreams and an acknowledgement that their family story could have positive impact beyond their own healing. Maya served on the scholarship committee, helping to select recipients who showed both talent and the kind of resilience that might help them navigate the challenges of creative careers. Roberto had surprised everyone by developing an interest in marine biology through Maya's work, reading scientific journals and asking thoughtful questions during their phone conversations. He had even attended one of Maya's conference presentations, sitting in the audience with obvious pride as his daughter discussed her research with leading scientists from around the world. The anniversary of Sophia's death had become a day of reflection rather than mourning for Maya. She typically spent it doing something Sophia would have enjoyed, like visiting an art museum or trying a new restaurant, while also taking time to write in her journal about the lessons she had learned and the ways she was continuing to grow. Maya's romantic life had also evolved in unexpected directions. About a year after moving to San Diego, she had met Dr. James Martinez, a veterinarian who specialized in marine animal care at the research center. James was thoughtful, intellectually curious, and possessed the kind of quiet confidence that Maya found far more attractive than the flashy charisma that had once drawn her to David. Their relationship had developed slowly, built on shared professional interests and genuine friendship, before evolving into something deeper. James understood the demands of Maya's work and respected her need for independence, while also providing the kind of steady support that allowed her to take professional risks and pursue ambitious projects. Maya had been cautious about introducing James to her parents, mindful of the complicated history that surrounded her previous engagement. But Roberto and Carmen had welcomed him warmly, appreciating his respect for their daughter and his obvious commitment to their relationship. The contrast with David, who had charmed them initially but ultimately betrayed their trust, was notable and reassuring. The question of marriage had come up naturally in their conversations, though both Maya and James were content to let their relationship develop at its own pace rather than rushing toward traditional milestones. Maya had learned that the quality of a partnership mattered far more than its official status, and she wanted to be certain that any future commitments were based on genuine compatibility rather than external expectations. Maya's circle of friends in San Diego had grown to include people from various backgrounds and professions, creating the kind of rich social life she had never prioritized during her earlier focus on academic achievement. She hosted dinner parties where marine biologists discussed research with artists, teachers, and business professionals, creating conversations that were both intellectually stimulating and personally fulfilling. Elena remained one of Maya's closest confidants, visiting San Diego regularly and maintaining their tradition of long phone conversations about everything from work challenges to relationship dynamics. Elena had been instrumental in helping Maya recognize her own patterns of self-doubt and perfectionism, encouraging her to celebrate achievements rather than immediately focusing on the next goal or potential failure. The friendship with Elena had also provided Maya with a model for the kind of loyalty and support that healthy relationships could offer. Unlike the competitive dynamic she had experienced with Sophia, her friendship with Elena was characterized by genuine celebration of each other's successes and mutual support during difficult times. Maya's professional recognition had led to opportunities she never could have imagined during her early career. She had been invited to serve on advisory boards for several conservation organizations, consulted with government agencies about marine protection policies, and even worked with documentary filmmakers who wanted to showcase her research methods and findings. One particularly meaningful project had involved collaborating with a team of educators to develop a curriculum about marine intelligence for middle and high school students. Maya believed that inspiring young people to care about ocean conservation was just as important as conducting research, and she enjoyed the challenge of translating complex scientific concepts into accessible and engaging lessons. The teaching aspect of her work had revealed another dimension of Maya's talents.
She discovered that she had a gift for making science exciting and relevant to people who might not have previously considered themselves interested in marine biology. Her presentations were known for combining rigorous scientific content with compelling storytelling that helped audiences understand both the facts and the significance of her research. Maya's success had also brought invitations to speak at events beyond the scientific community. She had addressed business groups about leadership and resilience, shared her story at conferences about women in STEM fields, and even participated in panels about family dynamics. These speaking opportunities had initially made Maya uncomfortable, as they required her to discuss personal experiences that she had previously kept private. But she gradually came to understand that her story of transformation could be helpful to others who were struggling with betrayal, family conflict, or professional setbacks. The decision to share her experiences publicly had been carefully considered. Maya was mindful of protecting her family's privacy while also being honest about the challenges they had faced and the lessons she had learned. She focused on universal themes of forgiveness, resilience, and personal growth rather than dwelling on the specific details of Sophia's betrayal. The response to Maya's speaking had been overwhelmingly positive, with many audience members approaching her afterward to share their own stories of overcoming difficult circumstances. These conversations reinforced Maya's belief that everyone faced challenges that can either destroy them or become sources of strength, depending on how they choose to respond. Maya's relationship with David had settled into a distant but cordial pattern of occasional communication. He had moved to Costa Rica to work on a documentary about rainforest conservation, apparently finding some measure of peace in dedicating his work to environmental causes. Their exchanges were brief and focused on practical matters, but they maintained a level of mutual respect that Maya found healing. The knowledge that David was pursuing meaningful work helped Maya feel that all of them had found ways to grow from the painful experiences they had shared. His choice to focus on conservation aligned with values Maya respected, even if their personal relationship could never be repaired. The fact that he was apparently building a healthier life for himself felt like a form of justice that was more satisfying than any revenge could have been. Maya's living situation in San Diego reflected her evolved priorities and improved financial circumstances. She had purchased a small house near the coast, with a garden where she could grow herbs and vegetables, and a home office that allowed her to work on research projects while enjoying ocean views.
The space felt truly hers in ways that her previous apartments never had, designed around her own preferences, rather than budget constraints or temporary circumstances. The house had become a gathering place for friends and colleagues, with Maya hosting everything from casual barbecues to formal dinner parties that brought together interesting people from various fields. She had discovered that she enjoyed entertaining and had a talent for creating the kind of relaxed atmosphere that encouraged genuine conversation and connection. Maya's financial situation had stabilized significantly since her promotion to the research center director position. For the first time in her adult life, she wasn't worried about paying bills or saving for emergencies, allowing her to focus on longer-term goals and even some luxuries she had previously considered impossible. One of the most meaningful ways Maya had chosen to use her increased resources was supporting causes related to marine conservation and women's education. She had established a small foundation that provided grants to graduate students conducting research in marine biology, with a particular focus on supporting women and underrepresented minorities in the field. The foundation work had connected Maya with other successful professionals who were using their resources to create positive change in their communities. These relationships had expanded her understanding of how individual success could be leveraged for broader social impact, reinforcing her belief that personal achievements were most meaningful when they contributed to something larger than oneself. Maya's relationship with James had reached a point where they were seriously discussing marriage, though both were committed to taking time to plan a wedding that reflected their values and priorities rather than external expectations. They had talked extensively about their goals for marriage, their approaches to handling conflict, and their shared vision for building a life together. The conversations about marriage had been remarkably different from the discussions Maya remembered having with David. Instead of focusing primarily on logistics and appearances, she and James talked about emotional compatibility, shared values, and their individual growth within the relationship. The difference highlighted how much Maya had learned about what truly mattered in a partnership.
James had proposed during a quiet evening at home, presenting Maya with a vintage ring that had belonged to his grandmother and asking her to marry him in words that emphasized their friendship and mutual respect rather than dramatic declarations of passion. The proposal felt perfectly suited to their relationship, meaningful without being performative. Maya's response had been an immediate yes, but she had also asked for time to plan a wedding that would honor both their relationship and the lessons she had learned from her previous experiences. They decided on a small ceremony focused on family and close friends, with an emphasis on celebration rather than spectacle. The guest list for their wedding was carefully curated to include people who had supported both Maya and James through various challenges and who genuinely celebrated their relationship. Maya was particularly mindful of creating an event where the focus would remain on their commitment to each other rather than on the drama or trauma of the past. Maya's parents were thrilled about the engagement and had immediately begun planning their trip to San Diego for the wedding. Carmen had offered to help with dress shopping, an experience that Maya approached with some trepidation given the complicated history surrounding wedding attire in their family. The process of choosing a wedding dress turned out to be healing in unexpected ways. Maya and Carmen spent a day visiting bridal boutiques in San Diego, with Maya trying on various styles while discussing her vision for the ceremony. The experience was characterized by laughter and genuine connection, rather than the stress and competition that had marked Maya's previous wedding planning. Maya ultimately chose a simple but elegant dress in soft ivory silk with clean lines that complemented her figure without overwhelming her personality. The dress was beautiful but not dramatic, reflecting Maya's evolved understanding that the most important aspect of a wedding was the commitment being made rather than the visual presentation. The wedding planning process had also provided Maya with opportunities to reflect on how much her perspective on relationships and commitment had changed since her engagement to David. She approached decisions about flowers, music, and food with a sense of joy rather than anxiety, focused on creating an experience that would be meaningful for her and James rather than impressive to others. Maya had asked Elena to serve as her maid of honor, a choice that felt natural given their long friendship and Elena's role in supporting Maya through the most difficult period of her life. Elena was characteristically direct in her enthusiasm for the marriage, expressing genuine happiness that Maya had found someone who appreciated her intelligence and supported her ambitions. The ceremony itself was planned for the research center, with the reception taking place in the facility's education pavilion overlooking the dolphin lagoons. The location was meaningful to Maya's work while also providing a beautiful setting that reflected her passion for marine conservation. As the wedding date approached, Maya found herself feeling peaceful rather than nervous about the commitment she was making. The relationship with James felt solid and sustainable, built on friendship and mutual respect rather than the intense but unstable attraction she had experienced with David. Maya's bachelor party was a weekend camping trip with Elena and a few other close friends, focused on hiking and stargazing rather than traditional party activities. The experience reinforced Maya's appreciation for the supportive relationships she had built and her excitement about adding James to that circle of trusted people. The wedding day itself dawned clear and warm, with perfect conditions for both the ceremony and the reception. Maya woke up in her own house, surrounded by Elena and her mother, feeling excited rather than anxious about the day ahead. The morning preparations were relaxed and joyful, marked by laughter and easy conversation. Maya's wedding dress fitted perfectly, and she felt beautiful without feeling like she was wearing a costume or playing a role. The simplicity of the dress and the intimacy of the ceremony felt right in ways that her previous wedding planning had never achieved, despite all the careful attention to detail. The ceremony was conducted by a friend of James, who was ordained as a minister, allowing for personalized vows that reflected both Maya and James's personalities and their shared commitment to supporting each other's growth and happiness. Maya's vows included references to the importance of choosing love daily rather than simply feeling it, and to the value of building a partnership based on honest communication and mutual respect. James's vows emphasized his admiration for Maya's intelligence and dedication, as well as his commitment to supporting her professional goals and personal dreams. The exchange felt genuine and intimate, even with their families and friends witnessing the ceremony. The reception was a celebration that perfectly captured Maya and James's style, with excellent food, meaningful toasts, and dancing that continued late into the evening. Maya's parents danced together with obvious joy, and Elena gave a toast that brought several guests to tears with its honest reflection on friendship and growth.
Maya found herself thinking briefly about Sophia during the reception, wondering what her sister would have thought of the ceremony and whether she would have been able to celebrate Maya's happiness without feeling competitive or resentful. The thought carried sadness, but no bitterness, reflecting Maya's ongoing process of integrating her sister's memory into her current life. The honeymoon was a research expedition to New Zealand, where Maya and James could combine their love of travel with opportunities to study marine life in different environments. The trip was both romantic and professionally enriching, providing them with shared experiences that deepened their relationship, while also contributing to their respective careers. Upon returning from their honeymoon, Maya and James settled into married life with the same thoughtful approach they had brought to their courtship and wedding planning. They maintained their individual interests and friendships while also building shared traditions and goals that strengthened their partnership. Maya's work at the research center continued to flourish, with new projects and collaborations that kept her challenged and engaged. She had also begun writing a book about marine intelligence that would make her research accessible to general audiences, combining scientific information with compelling narratives about individual dolphins and their complex social relationships. The book project represented another evolution in Maya's career, allowing her to reach beyond the scientific community to educate and inspire people who might never have considered the intelligence and emotional capacity of marine mammals. The writing process was challenging but rewarding, requiring her to translate technical concepts into language that was both accurate and engaging. Maya's marriage to James had also provided her with a stable emotional foundation that supported risk-taking in her professional life. Knowing that she had a partner who believed in her abilities and supported her ambitions made it easier for Maya to pursue challenging projects and leadership opportunities that might have seemed too risky during her more isolated years. As Maya approached her 35th birthday, she reflected on the transformation that had occurred since the morning she discovered her wedding dress missing from her closet. The woman who had been devastated by her sister's betrayal had become someone who could choose forgiveness, build meaningful relationships, and create a life that reflected her own values and priorities rather than others' expectations. The journey from victim to empowered professional and partner had not been linear or easy, but it had been profoundly worth the effort. Maya understood now that healing was an ongoing process rather than a destination, requiring continuous choices to respond to challenges with growth rather than defensiveness. Maya's relationship with her own story had also evolved significantly. Instead of seeing herself as someone who had been damaged by betrayal and loss, she had learned to view her experiences as sources of strength and wisdom that informed her approach to both personal and professional relationships. The decision to wear Sophia's wedding dress to her funeral remained one of the most meaningful choices Maya had ever made, representing a moment when she chose grace over revenge and love over bitterness. That choice had set in motion a series of changes that had ultimately led to the life she was now living, filled with work she loved, relationships that supported her growth, and a sense of purpose that extended beyond her own happiness. Maya's story had become one of transformation rather than trauma, illustrating the possibility that even the most painful experiences could become catalysts for positive change when approached with courage and wisdom. The sister who had stolen her wedding dress had inadvertently given her something far more valuable than any material possession could be: the opportunity to discover her own resilience and capacity for forgiveness. As Maya stood in her research center, watching children marvel at the intelligence and beauty of marine mammals, she understood that her life had found its proper shape. The woman wearing a simple gold wedding band instead of a stolen dress had learned that true victory came not from defeating others, but from becoming the best version of herself. The dolphins in the lagoon continued their graceful swimming patterns, embodying the kind of complex social intelligence that Maya spent her days studying and protecting. Their presence reminded her daily that the natural world was full of relationships and connections that were worth understanding, protecting, and celebrating. Maya's phone buzzed with a text from James asking if he wanted to have dinner at their favorite restaurant to celebrate a successful presentation he had given that day. As she typed her enthusiastic response, Maya smiled at how different this kind of partnership felt from anything she had experienced before. The evening ahead would be filled with conversation about their respective work, planning for upcoming projects, and the comfortable intimacy that had grown between them over years of choosing each other daily. Maya looked forward to it with the kind of quiet satisfaction that came from building a life based on genuine compatibility rather than dramatic passion. As she prepared to leave the research center for the day, Maya took one last look at the dolphins, whose complex social structures continued to reveal new insights about communication, cooperation, and emotional intelligence. Their example reminded her that the most meaningful relationships were built on understanding, mutual support, and the kind of daily choices that created lasting bonds. Maya's story continued to unfold with each passing day, no longer defined by the sister who had betrayed her or the man who had abandoned her, but by the woman she had chosen to become in response to those experiences. The wedding dress she had worn to Sophia's funeral had been returned to its symbolic purpose, representing not theft, but transformation, not loss, but the possibility of renewal. The future stretched ahead with possibilities Maya was still discovering, filled with work that mattered, relationships that sustained her, and the ongoing adventure of building a life that reflected her deepest values and highest aspirations. She had learned that the most beautiful stories were not about perfect people or easy circumstances, but about the courage to choose growth over bitterness and love over fear.